properly. So I'd like to welcome you all to coming, and the one thing I'm definitely not going to do is start with the old cliche, which is you make up in quality what you're lacking in quantity. I'm not going to tell that joke tonight because that's just one of the old cliches. Okay. It's true. The important thing about an initiative like we're doing here, and as you can see on the wall, we have photos of our past Harlem Speaks events, which we started in May. We range here in the numbers from, a dozen or two to up to several dozen, and it changes week to week, and it changes on any number of variables which are outside of our control. And the important thing is, as an organization here, is that we keep going and we just keep doing these events. They're all recorded for posterity by our video man here, and they are in the archives, and we already had a lot of people asking to partake of what's already in the archives. The co-producer of the series, besides myself, is Greg Thomas, who's right here. He's the editor of Harlem World. I'm sure you all know. Come on, put your lips together and give a nice jazz museum welcome. That's for my band leading crew, that kind of talk. And, Ken, come on up.
Sir?
That's okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ken Knuckles. Ken Knuckles. I think it's called vamping till ready.
How are you?
Fine, have a seat.
Thank you, Loren.
You're
Good
welcome.
evening, everyone.
Really.
Sorry I was late. I was at a city planning hearing all day on the Hudson Yards, which includes the stadium area. So as you might imagine, a lot of folks there with a lot to say.
I've heard a little about that.
Yeah.
I was just doing a general introduction to say that we've been doing this series since May, and every 2-month cycle we make it our point to have someone who is a serious jazz aficionado and fan, and someone who has had a significant impact on the music and also a significant person in Harlem. We had the owner of the Lenox Lounge here, Mr. Alvin Reed, Sr. was here in the first series. We had Greg, who else have we had? We've had so many people in the same situation.
We had the journalist.
Clarence Atkins was here from the Amsterdam News. And what brings us together with Mr. Knuckles is not only is the CEO of the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone, which we will be...
I assume I can.
Yes, you may. In fact, we should even have a glass. Here, we got a glass for Mr. Knuckles. You sure? Okay. And not only that, but every time we get together to talk, it invariably winds up being a serious discussion about jazz and musicians and this, that, and what record and who played this and all that. And I found out that Ken is not only that kind of a Miles Davis scholar, among other things, in our first discussion. So one of the first people I was really curious to talk to about how jazz has become something, a constant in your life, and how that happened and all that kind of stuff. But before, I would just like to acknowledge in the audience, we have many of our regulars are here. And I'd also like to acknowledge 2 outstanding young musicians who I've had the pleasure of teaching, and now they're way past being taught by me. But from the Juilliard School, the winner of the Martin Siegel Award last year, has already been on the road with Wynton Marsalis. Mr. Aaron Deal is here. Aaron participated in an educational outreach program that we did last year at a school called the Ramaz School here in Manhattan, where we went and spoke to a group of young people and played. I played the saxophone and he played the piano, and we kind of talked about jazz. Also here from Manhattan School of Music, but someone I first met at a jazz program I run with Christian McBride in Aspen every summer. Wonderful composer, saxophonist, Rahsaan Barber is here, and he's currently in the graduate program at the Manhattan School of Music, and he also has played in some jazz museum related events. So this is part of what we're all about, is our educational initiative and reaching out with talented young musicians and bringing them into the fold too, which we'll be doing. So Ken, let me ask you a question. How did jazz come into your life?
Well, I will answer that as best I can. But thank you, Loren. First, I want to thank you for inviting me and adding my my modest credentials to the list of luminaries that you've had up here. I'm only a mere fan, but an avid one. And I thank you for scheduling this on this a jazz holiday, because as I'm sure you know, this would have been John Coltrane's 78th birthday that he lived today. And our friend Phil Schapp is, as you would expect, dissecting every record, to its granular form. But it's always good to to hear John Coltrane. So thank you. How did jazz? May I, if you probably have, because you're a gentleman, Loren, but I just want to note the presence of two people who are very significant in my day-to-day life because of their pivotal roles in the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone. One is our board member, Mickey Shepard, who is chair of our Cultural Industry Fund, and I'll talk a bit about that and the centrality of jazz and culture to our investment strategy. And a new member of our team, she probably doesn't feel so new anymore, but she's a senior vice president for nonprofit investment, which includes our Cultural Industry Investment Fund, and that is Maureen Knighton. And, so both of these ladies are very, very important in the work that we are doing there. Jazz came into my life, I think, at a point where I really didn't know it, but in hindsight, I guess it came into my life when I first heard records that my father had. He was a big Count Basie fan, so he had a lot of Count Basie. He had some Charlie Parker. He had, and he liked singers. He liked Ella Fitzgerald. He liked Sarah Vaughan. I was born in Mount Vernon, New York, and my father had come to Mount Vernon in around 1930. So in the 30s, he used to go over to Yonkers in Carver Heights, which was a predominantly black section of Yonkers, and he would see a then young Ella Fitzgerald sing at these little dances, because she grew up in Harlem. At some point, she migrated to Yonkers, and she spent some of her formative years there. So he had a real appreciation for it, and he had a habit that I think instilled initially the appreciation for the music in me, because he would ask me when he would hear a song and I was with him, he would ask me, "What's the name of that song?" knowing full well that I didn't know, and he would tell me. So that began the I guess what's become a kind of archive in my own mind about music. So it was really through my father, and when I was very young, actually.
What were some of the, what was the music that your peers were listening to? Because one thing, for folks who didn't grow up actually in the big band era, by the time you wind up listening to jazz, you're frankly in kind of an isolated community, because it's not something that you share with most young friends. Maybe with your dad you shared it with. Right. Were you also into the other kinds of music of the day?
Very much so.
And what was that?
Very much so. And in fact, the appreciation, notwithstanding the fact that I heard jazz, it was not primary in my, my musical life until I guess I was 18 or 19. But yeah, when I was coming up, I was listening to R&B, and as we look back on it, those were the vintage years. You could understand the music, and it was in good taste, and you compare Smokey Robinson to some of the stuff that I hear Usher saying, it's pretty modest. But yeah, I listened to R&B and the 60s, and but always, I think, at a certain level, jazz was secondary but very present. I think I shared with you, I think when I really recognized it as a distinct form, a friend of ours who used to babysit for us had the Ahmad Jamal album at the Pershing, and it had Ponciano on it. And as Miles used to say, it went in my body, So I knew then that it was something about that music that was different from Lil Anthony and the other stuff that I listened to. But yeah, I listened to R&B and Motown, which I think is one of the great developments in black music when you look back on the body of work that happened under Motown and the quality of the music and the arrangements, I mean, I was listening to an anthology of Marvin Gaye records the other night, you know, and I think one of the things that made Motown so great is that the orchestration behind those records, many of those musicians, virtually all of them had jazz experience.
Right.
And they're so well done, you know. But no, I listen to R&B, and I still do. But there's so little of it, you know, that's contemporary now. So you're almost reduced to really listening to the 60s and the 70s and some 80s. But contemporary music now is R&B, I think, is only episodically good. Every now and then you hear something good, but it's not very good.
Kind of surfaces as a sound in some of the younger singers, but yet it doesn't have that vibration it had in those days.
No,
It's
not at
usually
all.
ends.
Not at all.
Well, what I'm curious about is just give a little bit more background, since we are recording this for the archives.
Sure.
Just about your young years, growing up in Mount Vernon. You mentioned that your dad moved there around 1930.
Yeah.
Where did he come from?
He was from Spartanburg, South Carolina, and he had come to Mount Vernon. Actually, he was chauffeuring a doctor that lived in Bronxville. And he told me that this doctor, whose name I don't know, but had an estate, because, you know, Bronxville's a very wealthy, upscale community. He had an estate next to where the Kennedys lived. So when my father was a kid, he saw, you know, little John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy and Joe Kennedy as kids. So he had come to, he would chauffeur this doctor from Spartanburg to New York. And
That's quite a commute.
yeah, and as a young man, you know, as really a kid, he was 18, 19, 20. But on one of the trips, he had a sister, an older sister that preceded him to New York and had moved to Mount Vernon on Gramerton Avenue. So on one of the trips to Bronxville, he brought the doctor there, and then he walked away and he came over to Mount Vernon, and he just never went back. So that's how he settled in Mount Vernon. And then my mother came to Mount Vernon in about 1940.
I see.
And they met during the war years, and I emerged from that union on November 8th of 1947.
You were an only child, Ken, or other?
No, I'm the oldest of four.
Mm-hmm.
Two sisters, one brother.
I know in later years there's a great jazz bass player who used to live in Mount Vernon, Aaron Bell.
Aaron Bell.
Robin Bell Stevens' dad.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, he lived on Columbus Avenue.
Right.
Yeah, and I had a meeting with Robin just yesterday.
Right.
Robin is also central to this vision we have about reestablishing, as certainly the Jazz Museum will, Harlem as a cultural corridor where jazz is the cornerstone.
One of our board members, and it was Dr. Billy Taylor.
Right.
Dr.
Right.
Billy Taylor.
Dr. Billy Taylor.
And that's one of the first exhibits we want to do to grab him, because you know he's like when we had Clarence Atkins here a few weeks ago.
Right.
You know, Clarence has interviewed thousands of people in his life, and yet he himself, you know, his story really hadn't been told. And in the same sense, Dr. Billy Taylor, you know, who's interviewed 1,000 people, and he's been interviewed to some degree, but I think the story of the genesis of Jazzmobile, and especially what it was when it began, and then the whole story with Dave Bailey, and then to Robin, especially those early years, would make an exhibit that we're certainly hoping to mount early on, while Dr. Taylor can be there to participate and enjoy it, and that's something that's absolutely primary. But Michael, just to get back to my thing, you mentioned about Aaron Bell living in Mount Vernon. Was there a black community in Mount Vernon? You mentioned a neighborhood. Exactly where was it and what defined it, and what was it like growing up in that town at that time?
Well, Mount Vernon is a small town geographically. It is only 4 square miles. It is due north of the Bronx, and it's 4 square miles. It's really sits between Bronx and Pelham and New Rochelle and Yonkers. I mean, those are the 4 borders of it. Black people were in Mount Vernon from the early 20th century. And if you know Mount Vernon, running through it is the New Haven Railroad. So that was a point, that used to be a racial point of demarcation. The South Side is where black people were, but there were also Italians, lots of Italians. It was a selling point for Italians in the early 20th century. And other ethnic groups. I remember when I was a kid, you know, Italians and Jews and Irish all lived on the South Side, but only whites lived on the north side of the tracks. And that was pretty much the way it was until probably into the 50s. And in the 1950s, a couple of things started happening. You saw a migration of folk coming from Harlem and the Bronx, kind of in a gesture of upward mobility, moving into Mount Vernon, buying homes. And you also saw the ability of blacks to buy on the north side of the tracks. So that now Mount Vernon, I guess this is Mount Vernon's second black mayor. Mount Vernon actually, as it turns out, was the first city in New York State to have a black mayor. Ronald Blackwood was elected in, I think, 1986. So this is before Dave Dinkins in '89. And yeah, Mount Vernon has had a distinct black population for a long time now.
Were the schools that you went to integrated, or were they?
They were integrated, but I didn't have a black teacher until 7th grade, and I only had one. I only had a handful through, you know, my high school years. In fact, it was something extraordinary when you were, at least when I was a kid, because you'd see a black teacher. Generally, she was a substitute teacher. He or she was a substitute teacher, and it was always, you know, an extraordinary event. But I didn't get into a predominantly black educational environment until I went to Howard's Law School. I mean, that was really the first one.
At Howard.
At Howard, yeah.
Well, as we work our way up towards your role now
Yeah.
at the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone, as I understand it, architecture and the law came into play. But what I'm curious about is where Harlem was on your mind's map as a child growing up in Mount Vernon. Was Harlem like a great place that one didn't go to, or that one did go to, or was it like a treat, or was it a place that the family went on Sundays? How did Harlem come into your focus?
No, Harlem for me was a kind of a cultural mecca. When you were growing up, and certainly in Lower Westchester, Mount Vernon, New Rochelle, to a lesser extent White Plains, but Harlem was a place that it was kind of like a rite of passage. You know, you went to Harlem for clothes, you went to Harlem for parties in the Riverton, you went to do other things, you know. You went to the Apollo. I forgot the clothing store that used to be on 125th Street. Bloomstein's, but there was another one where, you know, you would go and get suits and...
Henry Logos.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, it was, and my peers, you know, you came to Harlem. When you went to Harlem, it was something special. So it was in my teens, and I've told people since I've been here at the Empowerment Zone, you know, I don't live here, was not born here, but Harlem has been a real part of my life for about 40 years, because I really started coming here in 1963, 64. I can remember the first time I actually went to the Apollo. It was 1962, and I saw a show with, it was a Motown review, and it had the Temptations and Mary Wells and some other people. And then I went in the service when I was 17, and I got out in 1967, and one of the first things I did was go to the Apollo, and I still remember the show. It had Willie Bobo and Mongo Santa Maria, and a young, still relatively unknown comic by the name of Richard Pryor. And I still remember his routines. So Harlem, you know, loomed large. And it was at that point that jazz had started to really become a part of my musical fabric, so to speak. And in those days, you had a number of clubs. You had Count Basie's, you had Wells, that aside from Chicken and Waffles would have, people like Irene Reed and others. And you had, the first time I ever saw Miles Davis actually was at the Club Baron, which was on 130th, 32nd, and Lenox. I saw him there in 1969 with Lou Donaldson.
When you first came to Harlem, you mentioned 1962. What I'm curious about is that I think that was a Harlem that still had a strong relationship to what happened here in the 40s and the 50s, and it was still
Right.
that as opposed to, let's say, the 70s in Harlem.
Right.
And I'm just curious about your recollections of, I mean, one thing that I've heard of is what would happen here on Sundays, and when people walking down the various avenues, and how one dressed on the street, and just the whole general deportment kind of thing, and what kind of like it stood for at the time. But I'd like to ask you about that, about how it just differed from your experiences in Mount Vernon specifically. And then my second question would be, I'll wait until you answer the first one, and then I'll go to the second, because it just went right in my head.
Yeah. Well, Sunday afternoons, and while I was not here certainly every Sunday, but if you came to Harlem certainly on a Sunday or even on a Saturday night, because people would get dressed to go out. But on a Sunday, if you went down 7th Avenue, you would see like a virtual Easter parade of folks coming from church, and ladies in hats, and men all well dressed. If they were ushers, they would have, uniforms on and what have you. In contrast to Mount Vernon, it was, well, Harlem was the black capital. So you came to Harlem for lots of things, but I think essentially you came for culture. So Mount Vernon was a subset, but if you wanted to get to the main street of black culture, then you came to Harlem.
Could you define at that time, in the early 60s, what 125th represented, what 135th represented, or 145th represented? Because as I understand, they were distinct entities and distinct neighborhoods with different vibrations and different interactions between various groups and things. I'm just wondering what was 125th and what was 135th to someone from Mars or
Right. Oh, Mount Vernon.
or me.
Yeah. Well, 125th Street then and now, but certainly then represented commerce, because you had the Apollo and you had the Teresa, and that's where you went for to buy clothes. To buy Italian knits in the 60s. Guys my age, you had alpacas and knits, and you had to have a real knit, or you had to have a real band line. You couldn't half step, and alligator shoes and that kind of thing. Well, you went to that. In order to get those things, you had to come to the Stacey Adams on 125th Street. So 125th Street was commerce. For me, I knew of really only two institutions on 135th that were significant to me. One was the Y, and the other was Smalls, because Smalls was there at 135th, and Miss Lana Turner is entering the room.
Yes, she is.
Hello, Ms. Turner. So 135th was it was the Y and Smalls. I mean, obviously there was a lot more there, as I've learned. There's the County Cullen Library and Schoenberg, as well as Harlem Hospital and all those things. But when I was a kid, I only knew of really two things: the Y and Smalls. 145th was, I knew it more because it was a hill, than I don't think I went there very much. I remember, though there was a movie theater on 145th Street, it was called the Roosevelt, it's where the supermarket is now. There used to be a restaurant on 145th Street called the AKA. It was well known, it was a soul food restaurant. So I remember those little things, but in relative order of priority for me was 125th and descended from there.
So you were at the Apollo Theater in the early 1960s. You caught the shows. You remember who was in the shows. And again, I'm wondering if you can describe for us, and especially just keep for the archives, as someone who was there, someone who was sitting in those seats at that time when one, I don't think, thought that one was participating in history or in something retro. This was just absolutely au courant culture of the day. Yeah. And when you talk to musicians and you talk to acts or you read a book about Red Fox or whatever, they always say that those audiences at the Apollo, that was like the Mecca. The audience, if you could skate by anywhere else, but stay to the Apollo Theater, that's where you really found out how good are you about. What was it, can you describe the experience of sitting in that audience and what the vibration was like?
Well, yeah, and you read and hear a lot about the audiences, and in the context of the amateur hour, and and the hook, Puerto Rico, I think they call it with the hook, and if you didn't measure up. But the thing I noticed, and I can remember this vividly from the night I was there with Mongo and Richard Pryor. Mongo had this tune. It was a signature in his not Watermelon Man, but it was one of his other tunes.
Afro Blue.
No, it wasn't Afro Blue. It was another one. Just bear with me. It would go. And then he would, go into, and I remember when he went into that, it would be a coda like to go into, I guess it was the bridge or something. And the audience, as he was going into it, was saying, So I mean, it was a real appreciation for the music, musicianship, I should say. I mean, it was more than like to me that was more than mere fandom. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That was within that audience was an appreciation for the musicality that was on the stage. So I just thought that was significant. I didn't explain it very well, but I hope you know what I'm talking about.
I think I got exactly what you were saying,
Okay.
and I think you explained it perfectly. And that's something that's not really spoken about a lot, which is actually the actual musical aesthetic literacy
Yes,
of
absolutely.
those audiences, that from where the music came from and how people responded to it on such a level of particularity and in the writings of Albert Murray.
Right.
You read that, and then you can start to figure out how they were hearing it.
Right.
And but you mentioned something before, which was you went to the service when you're 17.
Yeah.
And you went in, then you came back, and the Apollo stands is almost kind of like something to compare the two eras.
Right.
How did that happen? How and why did you join the service? Now, this is pre-Vietnam. This is just at the cusp.
Well, no, it was right on the cusp of Vietnam. I went in '65. I had grown bored with school, and I had a crush on a young lady, and she was a year ahead of me. So when she graduated, one of the primary reasons I went to school went away. So that diminished my interest in it. I just didn't have a real sense of where I was going. But I did have enough sense to determine that if I went into service and got a GED, that I would not lose ground, so to speak. So when I turned 17 in November of 1964, I took my mother to the draft board because she had to give consent, if you were not 18. And she, with tears in her eyes, signed for me so I could request draft, which was a kind of nuance, because rather than enlisting and doing 3 years, I requested that I be drafted. So I was drafted that January of '65, and I went into the service, went into Fort Dix on the 18th of February of '65. Because I remember I was still in the reception center, which is where you went when you went into the service, on that Sunday when I had heard that Malcolm X had been slain here in Harlem. That was on a Sunday. So that was 3 days after I went into Fort Dix. So I was seeking something, I didn't know what it was, and I wasn't finding it in high school, so I went into the service.
What did the service hold for you? Where did you go and what did you do?
Fortunately for me, I didn't think it was fortunate then, but I went from Fort Dix to Fort Lee, Virginia, which is in Petersburg, and I went from there to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, where I spent about 2 weeks. And then I went to Fort Bragg in September of 1965. And then in a now barely remembered U.S. engagement, Lyndon Johnson had sent troops into the Dominican Republic in May of 1965. Mm-hmm. And he did it because supposedly to ensure a fair election. But the real deal was they didn't want a fellow by the name of Juan Bosch, who was a leftist and a compatriot of Fidel Castro's, to become the president of the Dominican Republic. So the United States sent first Marines and then several divisions of the 82nd Airborne, as well as a division that I was in Fort Bragg, into the Dominican Republic to ensure that Juan Bosch did not become president and to install Joaquin Balaguer as president, which he remained for about 25 years. So that's why we were there. So I went down there in October of '65, and in early '66, that's when the escalation in Vietnam started. In fact, a good friend of mine, John Howard Griffith, for whom a firehouse is named in Mount Vernon, went to Vietnam. We were supposed to go into service together, and because we had both dropped out of high school, and we were going to go into service, but he couldn't go in February. He went in June, so he followed me to Dix, and I went my way. He went into the 173rd Infantry Division, went to Vietnam in late '65 and was killed in February of '66. And February '66, of course, I was in the Dominican Republic. So, I mean, it sounds like you were on a vacation, but about 35 soldiers were killed during that year because it was guerrilla fighting, and we were in a compound inside of Santo Domingo, and at night you would hear, it would be like the 4th of July, but actually it would be not firecrackers, but gunfire, because you had a full-blown movement down there that wanted to resist the intervention of the United States. So you would be in your bunk and you'd hear this pop, pop, boom, boom. Yeah. So I stayed there for a year, and then I came back to Fort Benning in 1966, and the unit that I was in was redeployed to Vietnam, but because I had less than 6 months, the beauty of requesting draft rather than enlisting, because had I had a year and a half to do rather than 6 months, I would have gone to Vietnam. But the services, going into service for me was beneficial, because I think my growing up was expedited, so to speak. So when I came out, I was almost 20, but I thought I knew something, that been in the service,
And you had a sense of direction at that point when you came out to
Yeah, I had gotten a GED while I was in there, and so when I came home, I had an equivalency diploma on my mother's table. So I didn't lose ground. And so when I came out, I went to work for Con Ed down on 14th Street. And then actually from there, I was transferred to the Con Ed office right around the corner. That was 1967. So that intensified my relationship with Harlem. You know, in 1967, Sylvia's she had like a luncheonette. In fact, you know, when you go in and where the counter is, she just had that spot. She didn't have the northern portion nor the portion to the south. And so it was an interesting time at home.
How did the cultural changes affect you? I mean, going into the Army in 1964, 65, coming out in 67, I mean, a lot of stuff happened in terms of popular culture. I'm wondering how you sensed it when you came out. Did you feel that jazz had changed, popular music had changed, or are these things that we read about in cultural history books, but for people who actually lived it, weren't aware of any great change? Because we're talking acid rock, and I don't know what and what that meant here or to you. I don't know.
Well, you know, I had changed, which meaning that I continued to appreciate R&B and virtually all of Motown. But while I was in the service, and because I was around older, I mean, I was generally always the youngest guy in the company that I was in, you know, and there were guys that were 4 or 5 years older than me who had been drafted. Some were lifers, as they call it. So I think I was a bit more sophisticated, but that's when I also started listening more acutely to jazz. So when I came out, I started actively going to see people at clubs. You know, I would go to Count Basie's and see people, and as I said, I'd go to the Baron and to the Village Gate and things like that.
But let me make. I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out, did I answer your question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Any response is what I'm looking for, because my questions are just a version of my own thought about something, and what I'm interested in is actually what happened.
Yeah.
But I just want to take just a quick zigzag just to the present, and,
Sure.
then work our way back to 1967,
Sure.
which is, because what's fascinating, you're talking about a time when Harlem had, as you mentioned, all these jazz clubs, Basie's and Barron's and all these other places. Miles Davis is playing, all this kind of stuff, and it's not a place where necessarily jazz aficionados or people who are, you know, relatively looking for something esoteric. At that point, jazz is still a functional music that is being enjoyed by a large amount of the population across the board. People who live in Harlem, and I assume folks who are also coming from outside of Harlem to enjoy it. And now it's almost the inverse, you know, in terms of, you know, the jazz audience, the support for places that try and have a jazz profile. And I'm wondering, what would you ascribe that sea change in terms of the local community's involvement in jazz music and it actually being a function? Is it purely generational, or what happened? What happened to the world of people who went to Barron's or to Basie's to hear jazz, to have a good time on a Saturday night? And where's that audience now for jazz? Or where are they, and where are they spending their money now?
Well, in too few places, because there are just too few venues, I think, generally. But I think that changed as Harlem changed, and the economics around operating a club in Harlem changed.
Did the music lose the audience, or did the audience lose the music? That's what I've always been fascinated about, from people who heard it in the day when it was still something that was vital to a young community. Because you were in your 20s then, and you're going out just to have fun and hear jazz music.
Yeah. I don't think it was a question of the music losing the audience. I think for places like Count Basie, like Wells, like the Club Baron. I think the economics changed. And I also think that the middle class exodus from Harlem was such because in the 60s and 70s well, drugs were there, but I think drug activity certainly in Harlem intensified. And I think there was a gradual and ongoing, and perhaps at that period, an accelerated exodus of the middle class from Harlem. So I think the audience for the music left to some degree, and I think the economics changed. I mean, I don't know what Miles got in 1968 at the Baron, but I'm sure it was less than what he got at the Village Gate or the Vanguard. And I think with the changing of the economics based on an erosion of the audience because of the erosion of quality of life, I think those things all serve to bring about the closure of those clubs. And to some degree, I mean, there were clubs in the 70s. I was having this conversation the other night. Someone was saying there were more clubs in the 70s, black clubs in the 70s, below 96th Street than there are now. But that, the emergence of those clubs and the ability for blacks to go downtown, I think was to the detriment of clubs in Harlem. So I think the confluence of those factors served to eradicate jazz as a, I think as a performance presence in Harlem.
You mentioned before another club that virtually all of our guests have mentioned, almost like as something to be savored, just even saying the name of it, and that's Small's Paradise.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm wondering, in your experience, what defined Small's Paradise as opposed to the other places? What was it?
Well, it was this place of lore, I mean, because if you read anything about Harlem, and I used to hear my mother and father talking about it. I mean, it was the Savoy,
Right, sure.
and it was Smalls.
Right.
Those were the places. And when you went to those places, I mean, you were going someplace.
Right.
I don't know if it was Smalls was the black Copacabana or the Copacabana was the white Smalls. I don't know what the appropriate comparison is, but those were special places. Those were special places. And the way Smalls was laid out, I mean, you had this big circular bar, and then in the back is where the performance space was, and who was it? Sir Charles Thompson used to be at Smalls a lot. And I remember the first time I saw the Commodores in 1969. Lionel Richie and the Commodores used to come up when summers from Tuskegee, and they would play at Smalls. So I remember seeing them there. But it was a, I think of all of the spots, and some who lived here might take issue with it, but I think Smalls was considered to be the creme de la creme of the spots in Harlem at that time. And Wilt owned Smalls. This was interesting because I had dinner with Lloyd Price last night.
Oh, okay.
And he had a big record. He was talking about last night. In 1963, he did Misty. Remake of Errol Garner's. Yeah, and it was live at Small's Paradise. So
it was just one of those funny coincidences. When I asked the question, when people talk about Small's Paradise and they always talk about it as though it's just this thing, the person I had in mind who first bought it here was when we interviewed Alvin Reed, who we talked about before, who owns the Lenox Lounge. And he said, Small's Paradise, that was the club. And this has been burned in my mind. At the moment that I asked the question, who walked in the door but Alvin Reed? This is Alvin Reed, ladies and gentlemen, the owner of the Lenox Lounge. Almost if I'm cute, the small advertisement exactly that
Right.
second. I was just thinking about you. And with him is a wonderful dancer, a person who's very involved in things in Harlem and beyond, Miss Naomi Johnson. Thank you. Anyway, we went to the present, now we're back 1967. You're back with a GED. And which comes first? Is it architecture comes first, right? Or the law? I'm not sure.
Oh, architecture came first.
Okay.
And again,
How did that happen?
well, how did that happen? Harlem. It happened, I joined at the recommendation and urging of my cousin, a program in Harlem called Architects Renewal Committee of Harlem, ARCH. It was at 221-3 West 116th Street. And I joined that program in 1968 because I had a cousin who lived in Lenox Terrace, and whom I looked up to. And he was a draftsman, you know, and drove an Eldorado and all of that, you know. So that was my first benchmark. You know, I wanted to be like him. So he told me about this program called ARCH. In fact, Max Bond, who's a well-known architect, was running ARCH then. And the mission of ARCH was to get students, black and Puerto Rican students principally, into the study of architecture, which was very arcane. And to me, you know, I didn't know anything about architecture. I could barely pronounce architecture. But the notion of becoming a draftsman and, you know, making $150 a week like my cousin, which was big money in, you know, 1967, 1968, was what motivated me to go to ARCH. But the mission of ARCH was to get kids into college and not merely, you could opt to become a draftsman, but once I got caught up in it, I decided, hey, you know. So I got into ARCH and took courses during the summer of '68 while I was still working at Con Ed, by the way. And we had courses in IS 201, and I took some courses down at Cooper Union in the summer of '68. This is an interesting time. I mean, you know, this was when I dare say that society at large believed that they had, there was an affirmative desire to do something for the disadvantaged.
This is 68,
This is '68.
the year of
This is the year of the king, the assassinations. Tumultuous year. But that's the year I went to ARCH. And ARCH got me a job as a draftsman, as an intern at Skidmore, Owens and Merrill.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Who funded ARCH?
ARCH was funded by the Ford Foundation and the AIA, American Institute of Architects.
Okay.
So, you know, my first job was working for an architect up in Hastings on the Hudson. And that didn't work too well. But then from there, I got a job at Skidmore, Owens and Merrill, which is one of the, you know, preeminent architectural firms, in early 1969. So I worked there, and by that spring, the requirement of the program for those who evidenced some potential, and apparently I did, you had to make a decision as to whether or not you wanted to pursue college. So I did, and I took an SAT and apparently scored pretty well. And I had a choice of going to Hampton or City College or Michigan. And I decided that I shouldn't go to City College because I would be in my surroundings and thus unable to probably focus. This was my calculus about it. So all I knew about Michigan was like Cassie Russell, you know. And so I said, hey, I'll go to Michigan just to see how it works. So that's how I got into architecture school in Michigan. And 5 years later, I had gotten a bachelor's degree, and I was working on a master's, but I had been smitten with this notion of the law, because I had, this was 69, so by 71, 72, certainly 73, I was thinking that I wanted to understand the world of construction beyond architects. And what I was thinking about without defining it was development. So that's when I decided that I should probably go to law school so I could understand the larger socio-financial, economic implications of a building. That's pretty heavy for a guy with a GED, right?
You're talking to a college dropout, so I have no right to talk about anything because I don't even have a bachelor's degree. But having said that, you've led us to a perfect, I guess what I call a semicolon. And at this moment, we are going to change the tape in our machine because we lose great stories when we change the tapes. And I'll invite everyone just to have some fruit and have some water, and we'll take 5, but a real 5.
Let me add as well, Loren, a jazz museum is also an important part of that landscape. And we were both looking at, a critical site on 125th Street that hopefully will come to pass for us. But, those 3 initiatives, just to name those 3, and there will be others, will help to redefine Harlem the way it was when I got here, and you had Count Basie's, and you had the Baron, and you had these other places where you could see, you could see the luminaries in our community, in our culture, and it is only fitting. It is only, you can still see, Houston Person
That's right.
downstairs from us, but the lounge should be, a part of the fabric, an anchor in the fabric of a cultural infrastructure here, that has jazz and dance and the performing arts and the stuff that Vosa has been laboring in the vineyards for so long doing, and working with Aaron Davis Hall and these others, the primary institutions. And then there are the far more numerous mid-level and small organizations that is personified by the Harlem Arts Alliance that we intend to work with. Because, and the symmetry and the poetry of jazz in Harlem is obvious, because, and this is, to me, I guess maybe the most important thing of my grasp of jazz. What jazz says to me is, this is the ultimate expression of my people. We have contributed much to the world. I think nothing more important than jazz. And which is not to say that we're the only exponents, but it is derived from our experience.
Of course.
And that is very, very important. So, since it is a derivative of a black experience, it must be strong and vital in what is still, and some may say this is nostalgia, but I think emotionally, still the black capital of the world is home.
Yes. Well,
I can see this going on for about 3 or 4 more hours because I'm having so much fun. Just listening to this. It's so interesting, your story. I just have to say this now because the moment seems right to say it. But how lucky, without being unctuous, how lucky we are and how lucky Harlem is to have evolved to this particular point, to have an organization like the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone that's been able to pour the untold amount of capital into a place that's that's turned the corner, and frankly, to come at a point where someone with you mentioned the word when it came back to architecture, aesthetic, understanding and love of the arts. So all I can say is on behalf of the folks who are involved with the arts and with all that kind of stuff, how lucky we are to have someone with your understanding of it and your position. And let me ask this question. I remember one time talking with you and we got off on a big riff about Kind of Blue because we were talking about Kind of Blue and this record. Ken Knuckles' Desert Island disc list. What records, if you had to pick 10 CDs. I don't want to have to imagine why you'd have to pick 10 CDs, but
Right.
if you did, what would they be? What are the ones that you come back to more and more, and why?
Well, I have a compilation. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I have a couple of them, several of them. Well, Kind of Blue, which is, pretty basic, right? I think I heard Crouch say, if you didn't have Kind of Blue, you're culturally deprived. If you consider yourself cultured. I would have a lot of Miles. I would have. I just got a compilation of Dexter Gordon, his Blue Note recordings, and I think Dexter is my favorite saxophonist, really, because he was such a great singer. If you know what I mean.
I know what you mean, but tell folks who might not understand.
Well, he played the sax like he was a singer, and he was so literate. This constant reference to the various elements of the American songbook that he would work into a given song. So I would have Kind of Blue. I would have a compilation of Dexter. I would have a Blue Note compilation of all Wayne Shorter's material. I would have Saxophone Colossus with Sonny Rollins. I would have the Sidewinder with Lee Morgan. What is that, 6? What did I get to?
Who's counting?
Yeah, I would have some Ellington, and I would have Johnny Hartman. I would have Johnny Hartman and John Coltrane, the '63 collaboration that they did, and I would have a Love Supreme, and I would have. I would have another singer. I would have. I guess some Sarah Vaughan. That and some cornbread, and I could, subsist for a while.
Okay. That little Tom Hanks scene there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who are some of the artists, in wrapping up, some of the young artists that you've heard that you like when you go out on the scene, and are there any?
Yeah. Eric Reed, who I think is this fantastic young pianist, who is, 30, 33, something like that.
He's a kid, and he's a Harlem resident. He's been very involved with us also. He's a genius.
Actually, I should probably do it more. See, I don't pursue the young guys as much as I do. Try to get the veterans.
Sure, of course.
Try to see Sonny whenever he comes out. Once a year. See Jackie McLean for his annual pilgrimage to the Village Vanguard. But that's to answer your question. There is Eric Reed, Josh Redman, because I like saxophones. I played saxophone for about 3 years, from the 4th to the 7th grade. And I regret I didn't continue it.
It's never too late.
But
That's right.
I like sax players.
Mr. Knuckles, you heard him, he said.
Never too late.
Never too late.
Never too late, never
"You
too
come
late,
and
you're right.
practice at
Well,
my
you
house."
know, our
Yeah.
board chairman here, who unfortunately can't be here tonight, he's recovering from a neck problem, and he was hoping to come tonight. He also played the saxophone earlier in his life, so maybe,
Right.
we'll get a band
Right.
together of ex-saxophone players.
Right.
Greg Thomas, our co-producer, also played saxophone.
Yeah.
I finally got everybody that I know played the saxophone.
Hey, Jake Clinton too, you heard what he said? All right, now.
Yeah.
We got the money.
But Roy Hargrove,
Yeah.
I think, is a terrific young trumpeter, you know.
Nicholas Pate.
Nicholas Payton, Wallace Ronan, yeah,
Yeah, that's a
whole
good name.
generation of young guys.
Yeah.
They've all, a lot of those guys have been spawned by Winton, you know. Yeah, I'd go see those guys.
What do you see happening? I can talk about an open-ended question, but where do you see Harlem going, and what do we have to look forward to, and what's your vision from it, on top of what you've already told us, which is about the tremendous cultural presence and the culture driving it? How are things going from your vantage point at Lenox and 125th?
Well, I think things are going well, but things are going well. Harlem is cleaner than it was 10 years ago. I think it's safer than it was. Capital is coming into Harlem, but there's a caveat. And the caveat is what happens to indigenous Harlem, you know. And there are many people that think, you know, that UMES has been, you know, a shill for, you know, Fortune 500s and kind of a battering ram for gentrification. You know, I beg to differ. But there is and you know, Lana knows this because she's in real estate. I mean, there is this red hot market. The market forces have discovered Harlem, you know, and shells now are $400,000 and $500,000, $600,000 shells, empty shells. Eight. And hopefully there are a lot of millionaires, black millionaires now in Harlem that own brownstones. Couple in this room. I'm not gonna tell, but they know who they are. So that's good.
Do you want to help a museum? No.
So that's good. But the real challenge and the sharp edge of that of that factor is the pressure that it's putting on people who do not own but still rent, on the commercial side as well as the residential side. And we've got to be mindful of that. We've got to be mindful of that. Now, our thrust is to invest in businesses and or cultural institutions that at once add to the fabric of the community, hopefully create jobs, bring services of various kinds to the community that are not here either at all or in sufficient supply. But the cultural piece, to make it relevant to what we're talking about tonight, I think is most important, because what is going to keep Harlem Harlem is the culture. So we've got to make sure that the institutions that are here are strong and that they continue to perpetuate culture. Now, that's got to be buttressed by policies that make sure that as the brownstone market, you know, continues to go wherever it is, I think it's going to peak sooner or later. But there's got to be affordable housing, you know, and there's got to be rent regulation in places like Harlem. I mean, there's got to be in order, because this cannot become Yorkville, you know, or Morningside Heights. Now, I say it won't. Why? Because if you contrast Harlem to East Harlem. The primary distinction between Harlem and East Harlem is because East Harlem has been a migratory experience, from the Jews to the Italians to the Puerto Ricans, and there's still Puerto Ricans there, but the upward mobility has taken people up and out. Black people have been in Harlem for 100 years. I mean, that's been a constant. Now, the fortunes have been up and down, but in that 100-year existence, you have institutions, churches, which is, I think, the staples of which have kept people here. And that can't be eradicated. But we've got to be mindful that the market forces will take care of themselves. I think those of us with some that are given some responsibility and opportunity have to make sure that we work to enhance the quality of life, but in so doing, enhance the quality of life for not people who are coming to Harlem so much as, and this is a free country, you can come and go, but for people who are here and who can take advantage of it. Now, what's vexing about our mandate is that the mere existence of capital does not transform a community. If you are not versed in the ways of the accumulation of capital and how to access it. And so our challenge is to, as well as provide capital, provide technical assistance to businesses that know how to, do what they do, but aren't bankable, because they don't keep good records, they don't have technology, they don't know how to market. Most of the businesses in Harlem are on month-to-month leases. So it's hard to build a business if you don't have a certainty of location. On the cultural side, this is a rich community artistically. But as we invest this money that we have, these few dollars that we have, we want to do it in a way that it's going to leave a legacy, that it's going to leverage other money. Private capital on the way of businesses, philanthropic resources in terms of cultural institutions, where it's possible to create earned income opportunities for cultural institutions. So we have to provide technical assistance there too, so as to ensure as best we can that the investment that we make is going to be meaningful, because we won't be here forever.
Most people don't know that UMass is under a limited mandate, right? What was it, 5, 10?
It was 10 years initially. It is now, it will be 15 because we were extended from 12/31/2004 through 12/31/2009. So essentially we have 5 more years to get done what we need to get done. And but this is an exciting time. I mean, they have passed at city planning this rezoning that will enable the Harlem Hotel to be built. Now, zoning means that he can build now because he has the proper zoning to build. He still has to get his financing in place. But if that building is built, that will be the equivalent of a 50-story building. That will be the tallest building ever constructed in Harlem. It'll be taller than the Teresa. It'll be much taller than the Harlem State Office Building. Now, is that a good thing? I think so, because there could be 300 jobs there that go to primarily, if not overwhelmingly, if not absolutely, to people in this community. So, that's what we Vosa has lived his life here, and he can tell you far better than I can, about the glory days of Harlem. But I know, and Charlie Rangel will tell you this: the good old days were not necessarily the good old days. you know? So we want to make sure that in this time of opportunity and with this availability of capital, that at least to the extent that we can impact it, it is invested in ways that will enhance the quality of life of people in this community. That's really it.
At this point, traditionally, we open up for any questions or comments from our audience, and we'd be more than happy to do that. We are doing it. Does anyone like to add anything or ask Mr.? Yes, pose it.
This is, first of all, I'm just so pleased that,
I'm gonna give you the mic.
Can you stand up?
although I missed the first part of it, Ken, it was really very revealing. It's always good. I think that a few years ago when I first met Ken and we had a conversation, I engaged him immediately to be a host for one of my one of the topics that I was producing, black culture, white writers, and Jack Newfield was a part of that. And Ken was, you know, he was new to his position, but he was here. But we were very excited about that, and just to listen to this three-dimensional guy now, I have a better insight about you. I really thought that you were a Harlemite. I mean, you had that style, you had that swagger, you had that rhythm. So it's kind of interesting hearing your story. You mentioned Coltrane. Today, September 23rd, 1926, John Coltrane was born. So today is his birthday.
That's right.
Just wanted to add that.
That's right.
It was good.
That's right.
And Frank Foster.
Frank Foster's
Oh,
birthday
boy.
today, too.
And Rachel.
Great Charles.
And
Great
Rachel.
Charles.
September 23rd?
All of
All Ray Charles?
All of them?
Charles and Frank Foster.
Wow. And Train.
Wow. Sounds like a great idea for an exhibit somewhere. Can't help it. Any other questions, comments? Yes, please.
Hi.
You talk about developing a cultural economy, and that's one of the things that I've been from Washington Heights and Inwood, and one of the things that I've been mulling over lately is the state of the arts in my neighborhood. And I work for a local development corporation. I just wanted to hear some of your thoughts on what are some of the things to build on and thinking about developing economic development in the arts and cultural economy.
Well, you know, there's a lot to build on. There is the institutions that I spoke about that are more, have a greater presence here in Harlem. But let me say this, especially as it relates to Washington Heights, because Washington Heights now has really become, I think, a cultural capital for the Dominican community. And they have established themselves, you know, quicker than virtually any ethnic group, I think, that, you know, over the last 30 years. When I was in, I don't know if you were here when I talked about turning my 18th birthday in the Dominican Republic, you know. And I used to tell people down there I was from New York. And they would say, Washington Heights. That's what they, so I mean,
Right?
even then, it was seen as a place for them to come to for a better life. So now, 35 years later, you know, I think there is, you know, people spawn culture. So wherever there is an existence of people, especially, you know, in the case of the Dominican people, who are, you know, like Puerto Ricans and other Latinos, a mixture of cultures, you know, African, Latino, Indian. That is the ingredients for a rich cultural expression. So what are we doing? We are looking, hopefully we're going to be able to, we've made a commitment of several $1 million to what's Moises' group? Alianza Dominicana, which has been working with Colombia, struggling with Colombia, to develop a cultural center that will be located just behind and actually east of the Audubon Center, for starters.
Oh,
Yeah, 168th and St. Nicholas Avenue. So that's one. And we're going to be working with, well, what are we going to do? We are going to sit down with various of our board members as well as members of the Washington Heights community, because we have a concept that we're about to implement with the Harlem Arts Alliance as it relates to Central Harlem, but we have a service organization concept in our cultural industry fund, which is to establish through some kind of entity a vehicle for technical assistance to work with the cultural groups, identify them, set up a vehicle with an entity that either exists or we'll have to make it happen, to provide technical assistance to these fledgling organizations and capital to help them come into being or to stabilize themselves so that they can present what it is that they do. So, if that is your interest, or you have, you should be in touch with Maureen Knighton, who is our point person on the Cultural Industry Fund. But we know that the challenge, our frontier, is really to continue the momentum that we have in Harlem, but to really make greater inroads into East Harlem and Washington Heights. In East Harlem, there is, this great legacy there of the Puerto Rican experience and the experience of others. But I mean, you have
Jake?
the great archive there.
Races.
Yeah, Raíces. That is the collection of, the greatest Latin jazz compilation ever, that's been assembled. And we want to work with Ramon Rodriguez to help that organization come into being. I think there's real potential in East Harlem to strengthen not only El Museo, but groups like Taller Boricua, that's in the Julio de Burgos school there. I think that school ought to be the public theater of East Harlem, rather than continuing to struggle with the city and, but, before they will let go, you got to create capacity, I mean, when I was in government, we used to negotiate leases with the public theater, but Joe Papp was there, and Joe Papp was this giant. So, I mean, the city felt obliged to do whatever he wanted, you see. We need to create more capacity like that in our communities, because the art is there, but the administrative capacity, the administrative stability is what's needed. And we need to make more inroads in Washington Heights. So, starting with the project with Alianza and others, we want to build on that. We want to build on, but the groups are there. The groups are there. We think our mission is, we don't have to create anything. We have to help stabilize and enhance the groups that are there and bring them to another level. That's what our mission is, because the culture is there and the cultural expression is there.
Yes, I just want to say right quick that the first time I met you was at the unveiling of Elizabeth Caplett's sculpture
Yeah.
dedicated to Invisible Man.
Ralph Ellison, absolutely.
And you were standing there, very unpretentious. I mean, I knew who you were. You were wearing a Jazz and Lincoln Center cap. And I don't know if you were doing that so people wouldn't recognize you. I doubt it, but I recognized you. And I went up to you and I spoke to you. And I remember talking to you a little bit about the music, but I mean, that signified right there where you were coming from. And it was such a pleasure for me to meet you with all of your accomplishment and your station, in your current capacity and in past capacities. and you to be so down to earth at the same time. And I think we're fortunate in the Harlem community. And right here in this room, I mean, there's so relatively few of us, though me being fortunate enough to know the people who are in here, there's very significant people to Harlem, current Harlem history in this room right now. I feel blessed, as I'm sure others do, that you are here now and that you're in your capacity. I want to thank you for that and just make that statement. No question. Just want to thank you.
Well, thank you. That's high praise, and I'm humbled by that. Let me just say, I feel honored. I feel blessed to have this opportunity to do this. Mickey and I joined the board of UMass around the same time, and when I joined the board, I was still at Columbia, and I had no inkling that this would happen. I had at least one other opportunity to at least pursue becoming the president of UMass, and I, for reasons that aren't relevant, opted not to do it. When this emerged initially, it didn't, I was not inclined to do it. But some sharp elbows from some of my board members, fellow board members, and Mickey being chief among them, really made me take a look at this for not what it had been, and it's done good work, but for what it could be, and what in particular I could bring to this position at this time. So I just feel very, very fortunate to be here. Harlem is, I am not of Harlem, folks, but I've been in Harlem for a long time, and feel like I'm a part of the family.
Harlem state of mind.
Harlem state of mind, absolutely. And it's, I mentioned now, I think it's become clear that at critical stages in my life, things have happened to me in Harlem that have shaped my existence. So that I am here now at a point that I wish not to do anything else, except do this, and the rest of my life will, take care of itself, I think is almost poetic, having gotten a real start in 1968 from this very community. And I would just say this, this is a warm place, I mean, there is no warmer place than this place when people think that you are doing something positive or are trying to do something positive. I have gotten no greater respect, and this is not I don't go out, I don't leave my home every day seeking respect, but I mean, what I mean is that I have never gotten more expressions of regard and respect than I have gotten here in Harlem, and that is that's a blessing. Thank you.
Yeah. Welcome here to the Jazz Center here. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Jazz Museum for bringing people like this that we can meet almost like one-on-one. I mean, I've been with a lot of meetings with you, Ken Knuckles, and I've never learned as much as I've learned today. And I'm glad that you spoke on Menton's Playhouse. I'm one to want Harlem to strive. The jazz community right here in Harlem right now needs to be improved. We need more jazz clubs. I'm fighting a battle with a couple other clubs, and we need more. Like Menton's, I fought for Smalls, which it didn't happen. But we need more jazz clubs here in Harlem. We need the musicians, a lot of the musicians want to play in Harlem.
Right.
And a lot of them say they haven't played in Harlem in years and years because of financially,
Sure.
If we can build on that part of the art, the jazz community, some more clubs around and stuff like that, I think we can have more well-known musicians. We'll be able to pay them to come back in Harlem because they really feel unfulfilled
Right.
by not playing in Harlem.
Right.
And I'm glad to find out that you're really jazz musician. I mean, jazz, yes.
Yeah, I wish I was a musician.
That's
Never
what-
too
thank you
late.
for being
No,
here.
thank you, man. Thank you, Mr. Reed.
Hello, family. My name is Naomi Johnson, and we had an opportunity to meet at this Museum of the City of New York, and I was there to
Right.
listen to you.
Right.
And I asked then, as I'm going to ask now, as Mr. Reed just said, there is a true clamor. I dance from tri-state area, if not other places. The first thing they say to me, that I come from the Cotton Club, when are you going to invite me to the Cotton Club? When the family comes in the door and sees the extent of the size of the place, they are amazed. Yet and still from that same thing, they are truly happy when they leave there. It is exceptional. And the question that I have for you is there a possibility that you can reach out to John Beatty and have his place extended in size? I don't know what Columbia was doing over there or whatever. Help him make this thing come to fruition, whether it's either to move it to another space or just help him get this thing done. Because honestly and truthfully, I'd love to see you build something new, Mr. Architect. Do that for me, I ask in his name.
Well, no, he should, Mr. Beatty should reach out to us. We're about to relaunch a small business lending vehicle that, called Brisk. In fact, it'll be on the second floor of the apartment zone, which is just next door to Mr. Reed and the Lennox Lounge. We're at 290. And it will lend between $50,000 and $250,000, principally for the purpose of small businesses expanding, etc. If it's more than that, then you have to go through our primary process, which is the UMES funding, which means you go before our subcommittees and our board and all of that. And it's a rigorous process. So I don't know what Mr. Beatty's particular needs are, but we'd be glad to talk to him. We'd be glad to talk to him.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You got two more. Try, if you can, try to make it quick. Thank you.
Mr. Knuckles, thank you for the time.
How are you, sir?
Fine, thank you. I've written a little bit on this Harlem that you're talking about. I'm a writer, a journalist. But I wonder
What's your name for the record?
Eric Henderson. I wonder about the UMES mission, you know, as it expires in, the mandate expires in 2009, and your impact is going to be on getting other businesses up to speed. Can you imagine anything that would be left in perpetuity that could keep that kind of positive pressure, you know, that's on some of the key UMES, you know, mandates, even though UMES is not going to be there, and I understand your best effect is to see businesses up and moving and running and Harlem's culture intact, but I wonder, can anything else be left behind? Because without that pressure, then...
Vosa. The answer is right there, Vosa. The one and only.
I think it's a big answer.
No, it's you know, the primary legacy should be an enhanced business community. You know, and I mean, I'm not talking really. I'm not talking about a wholesale transformation, you know, because we just don't have the wherewithal to do that. But if you help 20 businesses up here and help them expand, you know, you've done something. You've done something. If we continue our work with the cultural industry, then these, not only will the primary institutions continue to grow, but the alliance under Bose's leadership, where you have, you know, what, 100?
300.
300. 300. See, and if we-
Members.
Yeah, if we can impact a critical mass of those groups, you know, it may not be apparent for years, but, you know, at a certain point, you know, at some point they will look back and hopefully it will, a pivotal point in their existence would have been the assistance that we lent them. You see? So that's the fruit of our labor should be, you know, with an enhanced business infrastructure as well as cultural. I dare say, however, that, you know, one of the things that we're thinking about now is the future. and what might UMass become, okay? So we're looking at that. You know, there should be vehicles, there should be a vehicle, you know. It may not necessarily continue to be UMass in its current form. Because I will tell you, I mean, we have done much to make it more user-friendly. But when you involve government and government money, there's going to be attendant bureaucracy, you know. And it's frustrating from time to time. So what we do know, though, is that there needs to be capital, a way for people to access capital in this community. So, you know, we have a committee set up to look at the future, you know, about what UMass can continue to do to maintain the momentum that we've gotten. But what might UMass or a derivative of it look like when the increment of money that we have left is exhausted, you know? We want to look at raising alternative sources of capital, sources of capital that don't come from the public sector and thus will not be governed by, you know, this bureaucratic process that we have. And I understand it, you know, I mean, I was in government for 16 years, so I certainly understand it, you know, fiduciary responsibility and all that. Well, you have that irrespective of the source of capital, but when you have public money involved, it heightens, you know, the regulatory aspect of it, and many people find that frustrating. So I think the challenge for UMass or whatever follows is to find private sources of capital that are available for investment. And that would be a sequel, a fitting sequel to the work that we're doing now.
Sir, yes. Okay, well, first I'd like to thank you. Thank you very much for this evening. I'd like to first thank our guests.
Thank you, Loren.
I had the opportunity to meet him last night at Bose's presentation for visual artists at Columbia University. It was a really wonderful outpouring. And I want to thank you, Ken, because we met many years ago during the Dinkins administration, and you'd offered our organization an opportunity to have exhibits and to work with you back then. Subsequently, the Empowerment Zone granted my organization, I'm the director of the Photographic Center of Harlem, us, as well as two other arts organizations that are involved in economic development and youth within the Harlem community, Harlem Textiles and the Institute for Youth Entrepreneurship. Collectively, we received, we had gotten something in the range of about a $750,000 grant, of which our portion was around $240,000. It became, we were approved for those funds, but then it just was a very entangled process. And and then subsequently was watered down, and it was just getting rather clunky, and I kind of walked away from it. I'm very, very encouraged in listening to you, and very excited about the future that you have for our community. And I'm just, you know, excited and invigorated, and I look forward to getting back in touch with your cultural,
Absolutely.
you know, your representatives, and just picking up from where we left off. So I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, once again, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to make the same request that I make at the end of every one of these presentations, which is to come back next time and bring two people with you. We have coming up Patience Higgins, a great saxophone player who I'm working with tomorrow night. We're doing a concert with the Jazz Museum in Harlem All-Stars in Scranton, Pennsylvania. We're doing a Count Basie tribute. So that's tomorrow night. That's in 2 weeks. And then on the 21st, we have the legendary bassist extraordinaire, Larry Ridley, who played with everybody you could ever mention, and who was, of course, the artistic director at the Schoenberg Center. And then going into the fall and early next year. We have all kinds of great folks coming up, including when we can get them on his schedule, because he's booked about a year in advance, Boza Rivers. And in conclusion, Ken, thank you for one of the most
Thank you.
enjoyable
Thank
interviews
you.
I've heard in a long
Thank you.
time.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to present Mr. Knuckles with our flag here. Isn't that nice?
Well, thank you.
Come up. Greg is our co-producer, of course. Hey, that was fun. There's Ella from Yonkers.
Yeah.